Right now? Good. Well, good morning, folks. Welcome, students. We're proud you're here. We wish you the best in your efforts. And Ms. Bud Fallon, thank you for organizing this and for your presence here today. So with that, we'll just get started, and I'll let Ms. Bud Fallon take over and do what she needs to do here. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank everyone for being here. This is the East High School Frontier FFA chapter. And what I'd like to do is turn it over to Cooper, who's going to explain the contest and what the kids were doing, and then we'll get started with the presentation.
Alrighty, good morning. As Ms. Fallon said, this is the East High Ag Issues team. So what that is we discuss an issue in the ag industry, and the way we are discussing it today is a congressional hearing. And each of us have had the opportunity to talk to our people, like Brendan here has played as Doug Miyamoto, who's here today. So we're very excited to present for you, and glad you're here. Thank you.
My name is Brendan Nagy, and I'm a senior at East High School this year.
My name is Alex Michaeli, and I'm a junior at East High School.
Good morning, my name is Reagan Allen, and I'm a current junior at Cheyenne East.
Good morning, my name is Charlotte Ellman, and I'm currently a senior at East.
Good morning, my name is Danielle Metala, and I'm a junior at East High School.
Good morning, I'm Brody Medina, and I'm a junior at East High School as well.
Sorry, I forgot to introduce myself. My name is Cooper Miller, and I'm a sophomore at East High. Thank you.
At the conclusion of our presentation, we'll ask that you guys ask us questions. So one of our coaches will be timing it for 7 minutes. So we have the understanding of what that 7 minutes feels like, and that's the time amount that we have during the contest. But if you guys have additional questions past that time, feel free to ask us. So if we don't have any questions, I think we'll go ahead and get started. My name is Harriet Hageman, a United States Congresswoman elected to represent the state of Wyoming. I serve as the House Subcommittee Chair on Water, Wildlife, and Fisheries. Today, we're holding a congressional hearing to address the question of, are the negative impacts of pesticides on endangered species worth the benefits of increased agricultural productivity? The Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act, known as FIFRA, enacted by Congress in 1947, regulates the sale and distribution of pesticides and ensures that agriculturists are receiving the desired results, protecting human health and the environment. The Endangered Species Act, also known as the ESA, enacted by Congress in 1974, works to protect species nearing extinction. In today's hearing, we will examine the interaction between FIFRA and the ESA and discover their impacts on agriculturists, environmental groups, and consumers. Pesticides are vital tools for farmers to have successful and productive operations, but their potential to harm endangered species has led to a multitude of litigation and debate. Joining us today, we have 4 witnesses. Karen Bud Fallon, explaining the importance of FIFRA on the agriculture sector, and Paula Frost, explaining the requirements of the ESA. We will then hear from Director of Wyoming Department of Agriculture, Doug Miyamoto, and Field Office Supervisor at the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Kara McPeak. Following their testimony, we will open the floor to public comment. Ms. Bud Fallon, can you explain the importance of FIFRA on the agriculture sector and producers?
My name is Karen Bud Fallon, and I am an attorney with Bud Fallon Law Offices in Cheyenne, Wyoming. I have previously worked with the Trump administration as Deputy Solicitor for Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. FIFRA, at Title VII, Chapter 6 Code, creates a regulatory framework for every stage of a pesticide, from development, distribution, sale, and use, to its application in the field. FIFRA keeps pesticides available for producers without jeopardizing human or environmental health. Under FIFRA, all pesticides must be registered through the Environmental Protection Agency in a very thorough process. This process involves independent trials in a collection of scientific data that proves that a specific pesticide causes no unreasonable harm. Once a pesticide is registered, a label on that product is developed that clearly outlines all rules and regulations that must be followed. This pesticide label is a legal document, and following it is mandated by law. Recently, the EPA has faced backlash from environmental groups who claim that this agency has failed to adequately account for ways that it may harm listed species, such as tricolored bats in Wyoming. Even though Fish and Wildlife documentation states that the primary threat to this bat population is a fungal disease known as white nose syndrome, these groups still argue that pesticide use should be limited or even prohibited. Most farmers depend on pesticide use to produce the crops they need and feed our nation. Eliminating pesticides will only harm our producers and significantly reduce our food supply necessary to keep this country prosperous. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Frost, you just heard the testimony of Ms. Bud Fallon. Do you believe that compliance with FIFRA alone does enough to protect endangered species?
Thank you. No. Compliance with FIFRA does not satisfy the ESA requirements. My name is Paula Frost, and I'm an attorney with the Western Environmental Law Center in Eugene, Oregon. The ESA at 16 United States Code sections 1531 through 1544 was enacted to protect species that are at risk of extinction. The ESA's goals have been carried out by listing over 1,400 species nationwide. Each species plays a vital role in a balanced ecosystem. If one were to go extinct, the whole ecosystem will begin to diminish. In an animal's ESA listing status indicates a species' risk of extinction. These labels range from species of least concern to endangered species that are almost extinct. Pesticide use has a direct impact to pushing species towards an endangered status. The ESA prohibits the take of endangered species. Take means to harass, pursue, shoot, or to attempt to harm a listed species. If a pesticide causes take of a species, penalties could include substantial fines and prison time. The ESA also requires EPA to consult with the Fish and Wildlife Service for any action that may impact a listed species, including the licensing or relicensing of pesticides under FIFRA. If there are any adverse impacts, the EPA is required to revise their relicensing decision to protect the listed species. When reviewing a pesticide's impact on species, Fish and Wildlife Service is required to consider when and how the pesticide is used. FIFRA's reporting requirements are often inaccurate when completing our ESA analysis. We have to assume that maximum pesticide use everywhere, all because benefit of the doubt is resolved in favor for this species. The ESA mandates that no adverse impact occur to endangered species, even if it adversely impacts our agricultural production.
Thank you. Director Miyamoto, can you explain the state of Wyoming's perspective on this issue?
Good morning. My name is Doug Miyamoto, and I have served as the director of the Wyoming Department of Agriculture since 2015. I hold degrees in range management and biology and rangeland ecology. The state of Wyoming, we recognize the importance of protecting endangered species, but we must ensure that agriculture can continue effectively. FIFRA strikes a balance between mitigating environmental risks and adequately protecting endangered species, allowing for scientifically based regulations that consider both factors. FIFRA-approved pesticides are subject to precise application requirements, such as spray guidelines and buffer zones. These measures are designed to ensure that agriculture can continue effectively while avoiding environmental and economic risks. Forcing producers to exceed these balanced standards threatens both agricultural productivity and environmental progress. Take the tricolored bat, for example, a species whose population has been in decline due to white nose syndrome, a deadly fungal disease that has killed over 6 million bats since 2006. Yet, environmentalists wrongly blame pesticide usage and push for stricter pesticide regulations that unnecessarily burden agriculture. Wyoming agriculture relies on pesticides to support cash crop production, contributing over $100 million to the state's economy each year. Overregulation threatens these commodities and the communities they sustain, leading to lower crop yields, higher food prices, and destabilizing Wyoming's agricultural sector. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. McPeak, you just heard the testimony of Director Miyamoto. Can you explain the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service's perspective on this topic?
Thank you, Congresswoman Hageman. My name is Karen McPeak, and I'm a field office supervisor for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. I have worked here nearly all of my professional career. As a biologist, I'm very concerned about how pesticides impact threatened and endangered species' reproductive systems, and pesticide runoff getting into bodies of water and affecting aquatic life. Mr. Miyamoto claims that spray drift mitigation, buffer zones, and other management practices mandated by the pesticide label adequately protect bats. They do not. For example, the tricolored bat eats bugs 10 to 30 feet above the fields. When glyphosate, one of the active ingredients in Roundup, is sprayed in the fields, it lands on the bugs. This means when the bat eats the bugs, glyphosate is now getting into the bat's system, which is causing nasal irritation, affecting the bat's ability to breathe. Therefore, spray drift mitigation and buffer zones are not reducing the bat's exposure. Additionally, bats typically leave roosting nests to eat at dusk. Producers typically also leave at this time to spray to avoid evaporation and take advantage of lower wind speeds. This means the bat is now flying through pesticide clouds and is exposed to more glyphosate. Then when the bat goes back to its roosting nest, they groom each other by licking others. So, even if the bat did not go out and eat a contaminated bug, they licked another bat that is just covered in glyphosate. Bats eat the very bugs producers are trying to get rid of in their fields. The tricolored bat eats bugs such as crickets and mosquitoes, saving producers on average $3.7 billion every year. As a biologist, it is my job to ensure that we're taking care of the threatened and endangered species and stopping take of these imperiled creatures. Thank you.
Thank you. At this time, testimony has now ended. We will now open the floor to public comment.
Good afternoon. I'm Todd Fornstrom, a farmer based out of Pine Bluffs, Wyoming. I grow corn, alfalfa, dry edible beans, and wheat. I currently serve as the president of the Wyoming Farm Bureau Federation. I believe that the ESA has not met the purpose in which it was created, to recover threatened and endangered species. Currently, only 5% of species on the ESA list have been recovered. It is evident that this act is only being used as a tool to control the land and what is produced on it, rather than to protect the species themselves. Agriculturists struggle to make a profit with inflation and rising input costs. Demanding more restrictions on the use of these pesticides will only drive more producers to bankruptcy. Glyphosate was used by 90% of farmers throughout the nation in 2022. This herbicide has a multitude of rules on its label that producers are required to follow, including how close it is sprayed to a water source, the requirements of specific weather conditions to reduce or eliminate spray drift, and contrary to previous speaker Paula Frost's belief, strict record keeping and reporting are requirements. These requirements are not something producers ignore. We follow the label because it is a law, and because we do not want to destroy the land that we care for and respect. Without access to pesticides, production of corn, cotton, and soybean crops would drop by 70%, with similar losses in other cash crops. If food production needs to increase by 70% before 2050, access to pesticides is necessary to meet this demand. If we were to rely solely on bats to control pests, bat populations would have to multiply by 53.8%. If farmers cannot afford to farm, food production will diminish and people will starve. We simply cannot meet global demands without using every tool at our disposal, which include pesticides. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fornstrom. Is there any further public comment?
My name is Marcus Ishii, and I serve as the Regional Director of the Pesticide Action and Agroecology Network, North America. In response to Mr. Miyamoto, humans are not the only species on planet Earth. In fact, biodiversity is one of the most beautiful and necessary parts of our ecosystems. Unfortunately, reliance upon pesticides has decreased this diversity and resulted in the loss of entire species. Take, for example, the extinction of the Little Mariana's fruit bat, which was killed off due to exposure to the pesticide DDT. The tricolored bat has similarly been a victim of the irresponsible stewardship shown by agriculturists in the United States. But change is coming through EPA work plans, which are beginning towards ESA compliance, whether industrial agriculture likes it or not. Current work plans establish a mitigation menu approach for prohibiting species risk and meeting ESA requirements. However, these work plans, though a step in the right direction, remain insufficient to eliminate the production and use of the worst pesticides. In the US alone, nearly 185 million pounds of glyphosate, an active neurotoxin, are deliberately introduced into the environment and food supply each year. This is 185 million pounds too many, and more active regulation is needed to avoid further environmental harm. In response to Mr. Fornstrom, while food production must rise 70% by 2050, the US wastes 60 million tons of food annually, more than enough to feed the growing population. Decreasing waste would make food produced organically sufficient to meet the population's demand. Agriculturists need to ditch the pesticides and focus on producing food in a way that poses no threat to the environment or endangered species. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ishii. With that, public comment is now closed. Today, Karen Budfallon explains the importance of FIFRA on the agriculture sector. Paula Frost argues that the ESA is crucial for protecting endangered species, especially as excessive pesticide usage continues to jeopardize ecosystems. Doug Miyamoto believes that FIFRA needs to maintain a science-based balance between agriculture and environmental protection. He is concerned that overregulation will continue to threaten Wyoming agriculturists and rural communities by targeting pesticides instead of real problems like the white nose syndrome found in bats. Karen McPeak argues that current pesticide regulations fail to protect endangered species, stressing the need for stricter protections under the ESA. During public comment, Todd Fornstrom argues that the ESA is misused for land control rather than to recover species, and that further pesticide restrictions will threaten farmers' livelihoods and the global food production. Finally, Marcus Ishii advocates for the complete elimination of pesticide usage to prevent biodiversity loss, arguing that this will reduce food waste and it will still meet population demands without causing environmental harm. The question before us is, are the negative impacts of pesticides on endangered species worth the benefits of increased agricultural productivity? With that, the congressional hearing is now adjourned.
Okay. Thank you, students. That was really informative. Are you ready to take questions from the, okay. Anybody want to ask these students a question? Senator Hyde.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That was fabulous. It was a great little debate you guys had up there. My question is, these federal agencies, ESA, EPA, should Wyoming nullify those and take a stand since they're unconstitutional? Or do you guys have an opinion on where their enumerated power is in the Constitution to even have those agencies at the federal level? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I believe that the federal government has become too powerful. If we're looking for better state regulations on pesticides and endangered species, we need to return power to the state level. Thank you.
Ultimately, it directly impacts all of our Wyoming agriculturists, and so I believe that Wyoming needs to be able to manage these agencies a little bit better because it directly impacts our economy every day, and so why shouldn't Wyoming be able to take a stance on that and be able to manage that better?
Okay. Representative Eklund.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Is the labeling on all pesticides in the United States consistent across the country between state lines?
So pesticide labels are gonna have directions that producers have to follow. However, not the areas of states are not always gonna look the same. Wyoming doesn't look like Florida, so we have to think about environmental issues. It's a lot more hilly in Wyoming, which means runoff can be worse. So we will, with Fish and Wildlife Service, if we look at areas that have a lot of runoff, or if we have where its wind speeds are too high and spray drift is a problem, now while pesticide labels will have direct use for everyone across the state, we will get rid of some pesticides in regions if they're just too much for the environment.
To add on to that, the specific requirements for pesticides may vary from region to region based on climate, but the United States tries to keep them all very similar.
Senator French.
Thanks, that was great, you guys. But to the three on this side, the public demands pesticides. And why do I say that? You three are guilty of it, but yet you have this stance against it. When you go to that grocery store and you want to buy an apple, then there's 3 or 4 apples that are nice and shiny, and then right next to it is a couple apples with 2 or 3 wormholes in it. Are you gonna pick the apple with the wormholes in it? I don't think so. You're not gonna do it. The public demands that there's pesticides. Yeah, we want them safe, but like the public commenter over there said, if that ag production drops 70%, I believe you said, then what's gonna happen to the land out there? It's gonna be subdivided. So do you want all that ag land, that beautiful ag land, as houses? So that's my comments.
I would say that the public often demands things that are not healthy or not beneficial for it or the environment. Ultimately, it is the responsibility of the federal government and of the Endangered Species Act to protect not just the public, but to protect these imperiled creatures and continue ensuring biodiversity. If that means eating a slightly bad apple, then I believe that the entire public could take that challenge on if it means the continued success of our environment and the continued longevity of humanity as a whole.
To add on, I believe that it is important to protect any wildlife within the biomes within our local and state ecosystems. Without our wildlife, they cannot regulate and maintain the balance that helps keep the nutrition within the soil and the plants surrounding healthy for the farmers and producers to keep products able to serve to the public. Without this wildlife, we're not able to balance the food that we have eaten. So when we're given the opportunity, a shiny apple used with pesticides or a lesser apple that was used without, I advocate for eating the lesser apple, simply knowing that that lesser apple was given through an environment that was used, that the wildlife gave to us, protecting us and using their own natural resources to help benefit us.
Contrary to previous speakers, if farmers were to go completely organic, we would lose more than 50% of our crop yield. This means the price effect would come on the producers. I know plenty of people on the ESA that would pay $1.50 for an apple, just for a plain old apple.
Yes, Representative Schmidt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Great debate, very interesting. You guys done a great job. Question over here on this side again. In reference to Senator French's question, you talked earlier in your debate about waste. And then you just spoke a little bit about eating or consuming less than perfect fruits, apples in particular. If we can only eat half of the apple, are we really addressing the waste issue?
According to the United States Department of Agriculture, approximately 30 to 40% of all the food produced in the United States is wasted. And a good majority of this is due to purely cosmetic issues. Nothing is actually wrong with the apples that consumers are not willing to eat. There are simply cosmetic or like slight blemishes or bumps that retail stores particularly are not willing to sell. So it's not really an issue of eating part of the apple and the rest is not good or not fit to consume. It is simply not wasting stuff that we don't deem as cosmetically adequate.
Are there any other questions? Yes.
Just for the students to know, that was 7. Okay, keep going.
How many do they
No,
need?
I'd like the kids to keep having questions because then they can practice thinking on their feet. But this contest rules, they've only got 7 minutes and the contest requires everybody answer a question. So I want them to get used to making sure everybody talks in 7 minutes.
Great presentation. Got a couple comments here. First of all, you're using the term pesticides all the time, and yet you're using the example of herbicides. Also, you don't talk about the health effects of how they build up into a system. You need to explain what the health effects are, how a pesticide and herbicide work. Another comment on this, and this is one of the arguments that a lot of people have, is that we're using chemicals and herbicides to increase the yield, and I'll use the example of corn. So because everybody uses an example, we need to have more food all the time, and yet we're taking corn and putting in our gas tanks, and yet we live in a state and even in a country that has excess oil. Why are we taking and poisoning our lands with chemicals and yet taking our food and putting it in a gas tank?
To address your comment about the pesticides, we use the term pesticides, but we use an example of an herbicide. In the federal insecticide, fungicide, and rodenticide work plans, they use pesticides as a broad term. So pesticides is the umbrella term, but underneath that falls herbicides, fungicides, insecticides, and rodenticides. And so for the purpose of our presentation and for the logistics and using the proper terms that FIFRA uses in their work plans, we use the broad term of pesticides.
Okay, we have another question here. This is Representative Strzok.
I will tell you, I was very impressed with all of it. So thank you. I guess I was very fascinated about the bats. So my question would be, if this is the route we're going through and we're going to get rid of all these insecticides, how do we get these bats where they need to be? And do they like our climate here? So that would be a question I would like addressed. Thank you.
So the tricolor bat specifically is found all across the U.S. They migrate all around the year, and then they'll hibernate in the winter. They'll migrate in the summertime. Bats are very, very beneficial for the environment. Not only do they eat bugs that producers are trying to get rid of, bats are also actually pollinators. So they will eat plant to plant and get pollen from other species or from plant to plant, but they will also eat fruit. But the seeds don't digest in their system, so when they drop feces, the seeds go into the ground and the feces fertilizes it. So they're also growing plants in other areas to keep the ecosystem going as well.
I also believe that, adding on to this comment, the reason that we are pushing so much to regulate more and more for those pesticides is because the bat is one of the species that can be considered as endangered. With endangered species, we can consider such as critical habitat. Critical habitat is anything that supports the animal's biological needs, such as breeding, feeding, and sheltering. The bats have this wide landscape that they can use for any of those benefits. And as was said before, if we keep adding pesticides to those lands, those bats are going to become more endangered and possibly even extinct.
Are there any more questions from okay, Representative Eklund has one.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So that may be as well balanced debate as you can have, and each side needs to know as much as they can. Sometimes you'll get thrown a curveball by judges that don't know what you're even talking about. Be undaunted by it. You have learned a lot of things, and you can answer questions with what you know, even though the question might not pertain to what you're even doing here. And the reason I say this, so Mr. Mosier right here and I are both organic producers of wheat, and so we have to farm the way Granddad did, and it's fairly difficult. I watch my neighbors with herbicides doubling the yields I can get, but both sides of you, and as an ag person, I have to defend both sides because we've got both there. Anyway, I guess one of the questions that maybe wasn't answered is what percentage of the world might die if we didn't have Roundup? Probably the main used pesticide out there. But if anybody knows that, I'd be curious. I've heard it'd be a fairly large percentage. I'm sorry to take so long with that.
I believe that the banning of glyphosate or Roundup would actually save more lives than not. Roundup is a phosphonate and an ESPS5 synthase inhibitor, meaning that it has severe neurological impacts on mammalian species. This has caused various very negative impacts on human health and has also been linked to carcinogenic effects. So the banning of glyphosate and similar very toxic pesticides would actually be saving more lives than not.
To add on to this, from the other side, I'm not sure what the exact percentage would be, but I also know that a lot of our own producers here would significantly struggle without the use of pesticides. We have to protect our own American producers who depend on these pesticides.
Okay, Representative Schmidt.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to ask a question for this side. With decades of use of pesticides, do you see a loss in the value or the quality of the soil from decades of use? And do you also are you concerned about the life that exists in that soil, the worms, the grubs, the insects that rely on that soil, and what's your thoughts there?
If we were utilizing sustainable practices on our lands, we wouldn't still be producers. We have generational producers across the state of Wyoming that have been producing crops on the same land for generations. If we were using unsustainable practices, they wouldn't be able to produce these same crops that they've been. Yes, thank you.
Contrary to this, if agriculturists were using sustainable practices, then we would not have lost nearly 40% of all of our topsoil, according to a study by the World Wildlife Fund in 2022.
Most definitely. Producers like myself care very deeply on what is in the soil and how that affects the crop. So if we grow a certain crop again and again by year, the soil can definitely lose carbon emissions in the soil, not making the crops grow to the extent that they should.
Thank you. So we're talking crops here. What do you all know about? I raise sheep, and so I've got problems if I don't put an insecticide on after I shear. We now are struggling. We've kind of gotten rid of ticks, but we are really struggling with lice. So if this was taken away, which they're wanting to take this away, once I get that lice in there, there is no way my wool is worth nothing. It's hard enough. It pretty much takes the price of the wool to pay for the shears a lot of years. So I guess I'm gonna release all these bats and stick them on my sheep. Hopefully they'll take out the lice. So this is just one thing. What if are they going to address this? Have you looked into that? What have we studied on that? And then I was just gonna make a comment. My whole life I've worked with herbicides, insecticides. I have had 7 very healthy children. I've had this stuff on me. I don't have very healthy. So I guess my one question is, what are the facts really? What is the truth of saying this causes all this other problems with people when would be a statistic that everything's fine? I've had it on me most of my life, so it's just a question for you. Thank you.
So the ESA may claim that glyphosate, an active ingredient in Roundup, may cause cancer, but they really are just using it as, like they said, in white nose syndrome, affects the bats, but they have no physical proof that the glyphosate is really killing the bats. So to answer your question, these chemicals that we use for crops or livestock definitely may not be harmful to humans.
To add on to that and contradict the other side, through definite studies through biology, there are things such as zoonotic diseases, which are diseases and illnesses that can be spread from humans to animals. While you may add insecticides and herbicides near or on your animals, they may not directly affect you, but say those got into your animal, whether that's through the skin or other oral insertions of that pesticide, that can impact further consumers that you're using, whether that's through the wool that's going to be into that, or it's going to be through the sheep that's being raised.
To add on to Paula's comment here, glyphosate is one of the active ingredients in Roundup. Now, we all know that we can buy Roundup at Walmart or anything. Now, producers for big operations will have licenses, but what about the people that just go out and buy it and spray in their backyard? They don't know how much to spray. They might be overspraying in the fields. Now, if you look at some labels, it says keep away from pets, keep away from children. Now, if they don't know how much to spray, they could be overspraying and harming the people, but they could also be harming the land that animals live on.
Okay, are there any other questions from the public here? Okay, seeing none, I want to make a statement to you folks. I just want to congratulate all of you for the job you did here today, but more than that, I want to express my admiration and support for the FFA program. I think you students represent the FFA very well. And one other thing, I'm glad to see there's more young men here than I've seen in the past. So thank you very much, and I'll turn it over to Ms. Bud Fallon.
So if the kids want to sit down a minute, the last thing I would like to ask you is, do you, having listened to this from the audience, have any tips for the kids on presentation or speaking or style? They're judged on all of that when we actually go to the state, and if we win state, we go to national. So if you have any thoughts or ideas on how they could have presented better, ways that they could improve their presentations, we'd sure love to have them.
My only comment is I think they need to come give us all a lesson. It was very impressive.
When you're speaking, I would like to have you either sit or get closer. There's a couple of you I couldn't hear very well, and it was kind of hard to understand actually what you were saying. So if you could either speak up louder or sit down and talk into the microphones.
At times you seem very, very rehearsed. And I know you're trying to learn a lot about it, but try to be a little more natural and a little more adamant on your stance, whatever your stance is. Be more, not aggressive, but this is how I feel and whatever. But try not to be quite so rehearsed. All of you were pretty rehearsed, but not saying that's bad. I'm just trying to maybe give you a pointer to where you can be the top FFA group in the state, so.
Okay. Well, again, we want to thank the committee very much for inviting us here. We appreciate the time and the tips, and I will let you guys know how we do at state. Thank you.